Pure Base 500DX by Be Quiet is optimized for high cooling performance and is designed for those who seek low noise and high airflow all in one budget-friendly chassis. The high airflow mesh intake allows the three included Pure Wings 2 140mm fans to silently cool your PC components, while the ARGB light strips at the front and interior of the case give your build that look you've been looking for. More information on the Pure Base 500DX in the description, and thanks to Be Quiet for sponsoring this video. What's going on, people? It's Tim and Joe making videos about computer parts, a video card review for the first time in a while, all up on the internet. And it's a video card I've never had the business or pleasure of touching, never had the pleasure of playing with. It's a GTX 980 non-TI. Played with hundreds of 980 Ti's, hundreds. And lots of 970s, lots of cards from around this time, but I always saw the 980 as like it doesn't have enough VRAM kind of thing to play with, and it soured it, and I just never really came across one until eBay found a pretty good deal on one considering the times. It's a joke that I say a pretty good one, a good deal. It's not. I paid $210 for a GTX 980 4GB, a PNY reference model, but the hitch was it came only with a water block. So XSPC here. So we see I've obviously corrected this. I have several GPU coolers. Here's an Accelero 3. Fired that on there, and now she's a card ready for some business. So, you know, there's no sense in putting a water loop on this card or whatever to do the testing, especially considering if we pop over here, look at how well this thing is performing. Okay, we have it running heaven benchmark for a couple of takes now, and it's peaked at about 63 degrees. I had the side panel on here before that. It was about 65 degrees. So this Accelero 3 fan giant 5-6 heat pipe cooler or whatever is doing just fine with a max overclock at 1500 megahertz. So she's doing pretty damn well. So, why did I buy this? Well, to review for the channel, but I also like to buy, you know, mid-rangey cards to put into systems for sale, and I thought this would be a good candidate for that. And at $210, I mean, it's like RX 580 territory right now in Canada, like 160 bucks USD. I know that sounds really high. Like, I would personally like to see a time where RX 580s come back down to around $150. I was buying them for that. Used way, like all the time before COVID, but things have really changed since then. And when, you know, I go look up GTX 980s and they're all like $250, $300, and this one's $200. That's how I consider that a half decent deal. So here we are, it's here. You see it running at 63 degrees, 1500 megahertz, with a 4000 megahertz effective clock on the memory. And if we put this back, I believe this was a PNY reference model. We see here that goes down to 1240 megahertz. That's its max boost clock, which is pretty damn good. With it's a little higher than normal because it should only boost to 1216, but 1126 megahertz base. Clocked pretty high for the time, you know, considering, and going up to 1500 megahertz. That's really good for the time, and it's like crazy stable at these clocks. I was able to get it about 1550, but it was pushing the limits there, and there was no reason. So I've had a lot of time to play around with this. This launched September 18th, 2014. It was kind of a stopgap between because like AMD was doing the same thing back then that they're doing now. They had nothing. They had no competition. So Nvidia was dictating what they did, and the 780 Ti was the big card at the time, and then they released the 980 and the 970, and the 980 was like beating, it's kind of like newer titles and stuff like that. It was able to beat out the 780 Ti, and it was much cheaper. So it was like a really neat window. But the 4 gigabytes of VRAM. Like, people knew something bigger was coming, and I guess NVIDIA was just waiting around for something to come out of AMD, and it didn't happen. So by the next summer in 2015, they released the 980 Ti and the Titan X Maxwell, and then AMD released the Fury, which, you know, maybe beat this out just barely, but it was definitely not beating out the 980 Ti. So this card had a pretty good shelf life before even the Ti version came out. It's not like these days where they immediately launch with the Ti. I've been playing around with this. Pretty nice little card. Definitely performs very well considering, you know, the power isn't too bad. I think it's 165 watt TDP. 2 6-pin connectors. That is not terrible. And it's not making any noise in this configuration, so I think like even a 2-fan, like, you know, twin Frozer version or something like that would have had no problem cooling this thing, even at some incredible overclocks. And I went and tested some very new games for 2020, as well as a couple of older games, just to see what kind of performance we can get out of this. And it did very well. 4 gigabyte VRAM limit, you know, not excluded here. There is definitely some titles, you know, we're in 2020 now. Things have definitely changed if you want to go 1080p highest settings in some newer games. So we'll jump through some of those. We'll do some benchmarks, and I'll take this thing on here just so you can have a look. I don't know. Well, you'll have a look at it. And then when we come back, we'll talk about some of its competitors now, and should you buy one? I don't know. Cue up the benchmarks, Timmy. Alrighty, so she did pretty well. Like, I know there was a last couple of games there. We'll talk about that in just a second, but it does pretty well. It's up there with, you want to talk competition right now. Ow, it is very actually hot, quite on the back. There we go. Quite hot in the, no back plate, but you know, I could put that one on there or whatever. But here's the card, and it is fairly toasty still. I don't know, you've seen an Accelerow on a card before, I'm sure, but it performs awesome with this thing on here. Does very, very well. Thanks, you have to make that noise. Headphone users know what I'm talking about. Let's talk about that first round of games. You're talking Fortnite, you know, we're talking Apex Legends, Far Cry 5, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, things that came out not that long ago. It does very well. Doom Eternal even. There's a lot of lower API games that still fare out pretty well with this kind of card going on. It does very well at, you know, averages of motorcycle. It averages at around 100 FPS in some of those games. It does very, very well, but those last three specifically, Control, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Red Dead Redemption, very, very, very RAM intensive, games that start yelling at you if you try and crank the details up. Shadow of the Tomb Raider actually wouldn't even load on ultra settings 1080p on DirectX 12. With this thing, it just won't launch because, I don't know, the age of the card and the VRAM limitations. It says there's not enough VRAM. So there is an issue with the 4 gigabytes on this, but if you're sticking to 1080p, you could definitely crank down a couple of settings on even those last couple of games. And this can be like a 1080p 60 frame a second all day long card. As long as you're willing to make some, you still have one of these in your system, you're probably still pretty happy with it. It probably doesn't even heat that much up in your case. You probably, you have that option to overclock it like 350 megahertz. Above its boost clock, it really goes like to 1500, 1550, depending on the version you have and stuff like that. That's pretty impressive, but clock speed isn't going to save it all. So if we're talking, some of its contemporaries right now, a really good RX 580 might beat this thing, especially an 8 gigabyte, especially. I don't think a 1066 gigabyte would be beating this thing, but it would be close. It would be close. And then, we have like the 5500 XT, 4 gigabyte would be probably on par with this, or like a 1650 Super, 1660 regular or whatever, in that range. All of those, with the lower VRAM limits and stuff like that. Put, this Titan clock, well, not Titan, but this flagship card from 2014, kind of on its knees these days, and those are all really budget cards. But if you spent the $549.99 this thing MSRP'd for back in 2014, you could still be using this and having a smile on your face, because the performance on it actually really does hold up. It's a pretty good little piece of kit for those of you out there that aren't looking for 1440p high refresh rate or 4K gaming, and that's the majority of you out there. So I don't know, GTX 980, if only it would have had 6 gigs of VRAM and maybe 8 on the 980 Ti, this would be, I think, a different story. This might actually be like more of a 1070 competitor. A good 980 Ti can beat, with a really good overclock on it, a 1070. It's talking about, kind of performance ratios and stuff like that. If this thing had some more VRAM, it should, you'd think, theoretically get up there near a 1070, but a 1070's got double the VRAM of this. So if you were looking to choose between, anything that has 6 or 8 gigs of RAM and, an RX 580, you would think that this should beat it out, right? But it's just the VRAM that's going to hold it back. So, I don't know, who out there has a 980 Ti? You using a 980 Ti? I want to know what you think. What's going on with it? Did I make a good purchase at $160 for this USD, 210 Canadian? I think I fared out all right, especially considering the times, and probably going to have to, in order to sell this, sacrifice one of these acceleros, but that's not a big deal. So, I don't know, I think I had a really good time with it, and I was very surprised at its performance in 2020, especially in esportsy kind of games and stuff like that. But you got to look at those 45 frame a second averages on Control, on Horizon Zero Dawn, and on Red Dead Redemption, and thinking you're starting to really lose some visual fidelity to crank some settings down and get this thing to 60 frames a second, when this was a flagship $550 card. I know 6 years ago, but yeah, I don't know. So I'm at Watch Timmy Joe Instagram and Twitter. I had a lot of fun with the 980, and I hope you did too. It's nice to get back in the GPU game and check out some games in 2020. Try to get as many of these, high-end 2020 titles as possible on these kind of things, and see, things are really in I didn't put Flight Simulator on this thing, mostly because I'm gonna wait for NVIDIA to buy that game to release their 3000 series, because I think that's what's going to be necessary to really utilize that as a benchmark. But as for regular run-of-the-mill games, this thing will definitely crank out some frames if you can get it for a good deal. I'd say under $150 USD, under $200 Canadian. It's a half decent pickup for 1080p mid-range budget build. So I'll see you guys in another video. Thank you very much for watching. GTX 980. Booyah. Arctic Accelero. You need a water block? I got one. Here you go. Have a good day.